There's a photograph that, for decades, you really wouldn't find in most history books. It was taken in Berlin the summer of 1932, just 1 year before everything changed. It's just an ordinary street. A bakery, a man on a bench reading a paper, two women chatting. There is absolutely nothing to suggest what's just around the corner. And yet, there's this really disturbing detail that historians of the era all agree on. In surveys from that exact year, 61% of Germans reported feeling threatened by invisible forces they couldn't control. Now, think about that. Not by a political party, not yet, by something they couldn't even name. It was this collective anxiety, but without a face, without a direction, without a specific cause. Just tension. This feeling that something was about to break. A year later, the world started to burn. So just for a moment, I want you to do something that's kind of difficult. I want you to stop thinking about the leaders, the speeches, the ideologies, the weapons. All of that existed, of course, and all of it mattered. But what if there was something before all of that? Something that no general ordered, no politician designed, and no arms dealer sold. Something that was just there, floating, building up, almost like humidity in the air right before a huge thunderstorm. What if conflicts don't actually start when someone pulls a trigger, but long, long before that, in a place you can't even point to on a map? Well, that is the very question this explainer is going to explore. Okay, let's dive into the first part of this puzzle, the stories we tell ourselves about war. For centuries, our understanding of conflict has been based on a very tidy narrative. It's a story that makes a lot of sense on the surface, but when you start looking a little closer, you see these patterns that the tidy story just can't explain. You see, the tidy story gives us a clear villain and a clear victim. It gives us an obvious cause, right? Usually land or money. And it gives us a single starting point, some event that kicks the whole thing off. It's clean, it's organized, and it's easy to teach. But it doesn't really explain why 1914 and 1939, with totally different generations, leaders, and technologies, ended up looking so frighteningly similar. It doesn't explain why conflicts just erupt in historically unrelated parts of the world at almost the same time. And it definitely doesn't explain that moment, that exact moment when an entire society seems to collectively snap, all at once. Sure, political scientists call them windows of conflict, but that's just a label. It doesn't answer the really uncomfortable question. Why now? Why here? And why everyone together? The argument we're going to explore today suggests the clues aren't just buried in political archives. They're coming from laboratories, from data, from decades of experiments that have been pretty much ignored because of how uncomfortable their implications are. Because, let's be honest, when science starts to suggest that the collective consciousness of millions of people might actually influence the physical world, well, for a lot of people, it's just easier to look away. So back in the 1970s, a physicist named Robert Jahn, who had been the dean of engineering at Princeton University, decided to do something that no serious scientist of his era would even dare to do. He started to formally study whether the human mind could influence physical machines. His lab was called PEAR, which stands for Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. For 28 years, they ran these experiments using random number generators. These are devices that, by definition, should only be affected by pure random chance. And yet, over thousands and thousands of experiments, John and his team found something they totally didn't expect. Human operators, just by using their intention, without touching a single thing, were able to skew the statistical outputs of these machines way beyond what chance could explain. Now, the effect was tiny, but here's the kicker. It was consistent, it was measurable, and it was reproducible. And for 28 years, the mainstream scientific community mostly just ignored it. Because if it was real, it meant we'd have to rewrite way too much. So then, in 1998, a group of researchers decided to take the PEAR Lab's idea and go global with it. They called it the Global Consciousness Project. And what they did was place these same kinds of random number generators in over 60 countries all over the world, all running 24/7, all feeding data into one central hub. The idea was simple, but its implications were, well, they were radical. Their hypothesis was basically this. If a single person's intention can create a tiny little statistical blip in a machine in a lab, what happens when millions, or even billions, of minds are all focused on the same event, all feeling the same emotion? If our collective consciousness has a physical effect, it should create a much bigger signal, a signal that this global network of machines could actually detect as a huge deviation from randomness. They were basically looking for a ghost in the machine, but on a planetary scale. And on September 11th, 2001, they found one, a massive one. The data from the global network showed this huge, statistically significant spike, a massive departure from random chance. But here's the part that is really going to make you think: the timing. The deviation didn't begin at 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time, when the first plane hit the North Tower. No, the deviation began 4 hours earlier, 4 hours before anything happened that the public knew about. This result has been picked apart, criticized, and reanalyzed for over 2 decades, and it's still there, a profound anomaly that the data just doesn't let us dismiss. So, if a global feeling state can show up in the data of random machines, what else can it do? Let's take this idea from the world of physics and bring it into biology. I want you to think about your grandparents, or maybe someone from a generation that lived through a major conflict. Think about that specific silence they might had when the topic came up. That look in their eyes, that heaviness. Now imagine that emotion, that specific weight, wasn't just theirs. Imagine it was shared by millions of people at the exact same time. What happens then?
And listen, this isn't just a metaphor. There's a field of study called epigenetics, which is basically how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect how your genes work. And it's shown that the experiences of one generation can literally change how genes are expressed in the next. Think of it as the difference between learned memory and biological memory. Learned memory, that's passed through stories. It affects your mind. We remember what happened. But biological memory is different. It's transmitted through our very biology. It affects the body. And what that means is our bodies can be born already configured for a threat that we ourselves have never, ever experienced. And this isn't just a theory. Studies on the descendants of Holocaust survivors, on the grandchildren of those who went through the Dutch famine of 1944, and on the children of the survivors of the siege of Leningrad, they all show shared biological markers. Trauma isn't just inherited as a memory. It can be inherited as a predisposition, a way of seeing the world that's literally written into our cells. So the question is no longer just, what caused that war back then? The question becomes, what emotional state, what level of collective anxiety are we passing on right now? So here's the crucial point, the big shift in thinking. We need to consider the possibility that the emotional state of a society isn't just a passive reaction to events. It's not just a symptom of what happens. It might also be an active ingredient, a cause of what is about to occur. The idea that collective fear might not just be a response to a threat, but it might actually play a role in attracting the threat itself. All right, so this brings the entire question right into our present moment, right here, right now. What kind of field are we creating? Are there patterns from the past that can help us maybe understand our own emotional climate? A Nobel Prize-winning scientist named Konrad Lorenz, who studied animal behavior, wrote about this phenomenon he called social contagion. He argued that in conditions of crowding, uncertainty, and this feeling of scarcity, emotional states like aggression don't just appear, they spread, they become contagious, they move from mind to mind just like a virus moves from body to body. What Lorenz was describing in animals, the Global Consciousness Project is now describing in us, with data suggesting these contagious emotional states can form a collective field with measurable effects.
And let's look at how this emotional contagion builds into a really predictable historical pattern. Before pretty much every major conflict of the 20th century, historians have identified a period of what they call social exhaustion. It's this collective fatigue that follows a very distinct pattern. First, there's a sense of broken promises. A whole generation feels like the progress they were told to expect was a lie. This leads to a collective fatigue, this widespread feeling that trying hard just isn't worth it anymore. Then that's followed by a kind of corrupted nostalgia, where the past is remembered not with fondness but with resentment. And finally, all of this curdles into the blame game, a simple, powerful story that says we used to have a better world and someone took it from us.
And this brings us to right now. In country after country around the world, data from mental health surveys, well-being polls, and social media sentiment analysis all point to the same conclusion. Collective anxiety levels are at recorded historic highs. It's not just that anxiety has increased, it's that it has become normal. We've actually reached a point where a constant, low-grade sense of threat and uncertainty just feels normal. What would feel strange is a sense that everything is okay. And that's the trap. This state of normalized, anxious resignation, this kind of shared belief that something bad is bound to happen and there's nothing we can do about it, this is exactly the kind of sustained, coherent emotional state that the Global Consciousness Project's data suggests leaves the deepest imprint.
Not the big, explosive, one-day events, but the emotions that linger for weeks and months and years.
Now look, I get it. Someone could rightly say that a lot of this is speculative, that the PEAR Lab experiments were fringe, that the GCP has its methodological limitations, and you know what? That's true. This isn't classical physics. The results aren't the kind that you can use to build a bridge. The evidence isn't conclusive, but, and this is the absolute crucial point, it's also not zero. And it's that not zero that makes this whole territory so uncomfortable and so important. Because if there is even a small but real probability that our collective consciousness influences our shared physical world, then we are facing one of the most important questions a society can ever ask itself. And that question, it's a personal one. It's not about politics or policy. It's about responsibility, a kind of collective mental hygiene. What quality of consciousness are you contributing to the shared field we all live in? Every time we consume a story of threat and make it our own, every time we feel that the world is dangerous and the other is an enemy, we are adding something to that field. Fear or calm, suspicion or curiosity, fatalism or presence, it all matters, in a way we are only just beginning to measure. Let's go all the way back to that title, You Caused It. I know, it sounds accusatory, but I promise you, it isn't meant as an accusation. It's meant as an invitation. An invitation to shift our perspective from seeing conflict as something that just happens to us, to considering that maybe we, in a way we don't fully understand, also help create it. Because if you can cause it, you can also change it. And this presents us with a final choice. Is this the most disturbing idea you've ever heard? Or is it the most liberating? You get to decide.